I am here today with the tale of the day that the United States kicked France's ass. In the one category they hold most dear, wine. I'm talking about the Judgment of Paris. And no, this is not the tale of a vengeful goddess who threw a golden apple into a crowd, causing a beauty contest between three goddesses to be judged by Paris of Troy, causing eventually the Trojan War. That's a story for another day, and probably another YouTube channel. I am talking about the Judgment of Paris of wine, which took place on May 24th of 1976. A little backstory. France, for let's call it millennia, has been dominant in the wine world. They've been making wine there since the Romans conquered in 58 BC-ish. They have the varieties that we know around the world. The Cabernets, the Sauvignon Blancs, the Chardonnays, the Pinot Noirs, the Syrahs, the Grenaches. These are the grapes that are so well known around the world that we call them international varieties. They have some of the most stringent laws around how to make wine, which ensures pristine quality. French wine was what was championed by many of the early US presidents. Thomas Jefferson was a huge Francophile. Loved French wine, brought French wine over, tried to make wine here. Didn't go so well. Napa was new to the game. Napa was basically farmland with farmers that were just trying to make some honest wines. No one had really heard of them yet. Let's move into our cast of characters. We have Stephen Spurrier, an English wine merchant who ran a French wine school, l'Académie des Vins. This school was also ran by Patricia Gallagher. Now, Stephen gets most of the glory for coming up with the idea to have the Judgment of Paris blind tasting, but it actually was Patricia's idea. She had been abroad in Napa, tasting all the wine. She's like, wow, they're making really good wine here. Why aren't people buying it in our store abroad? And then she says, hey, I don't know, why don't we just have a tasting and compare it to the French wines that everyone respects so much? Stephen says, great idea. I will go decide which wines go in the contest. Because of course the man gets to decide whatever. So he does that. He goes to Napa, picks the top Cabernets and Chardonnays. Meanwhile, they gather a selection of the most highly lauded, first growth, fancy wines from Bordeaux and Burgundy, or Bourgogne, as the French like to say. I know my French teacher mother is like, why does she still pronounce French like she knows nothing? Sorry, Mom. Bordeaux and Bourgogne remain probably the most expensive and the most highly allocated and highly cherished wines in the world. Now, on to the judges. Spurrier enlists the Inspector General of the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée Board. That's the organization that decides basically how you can make wine and how much you can make of it in every little region of France. He brings on Odette Kahn, the editor for Le Revue de Vin, the French wine review. He also brings on one of the co-owners of France's, to this day, most expensive and cherished and allocated and impossible to find and even more impossible to drink, because the one time I had it, it was at a wine bar selling it for $500 a glass, Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. These are just a few of the very esteemed judges he brings on. And he's like, cool, I'm gonna have these best American wines, we're gonna taste some French wines, it's gonna be fun. And then it occurs to him that the French aren't very fun. My words, not his. And that they're probably just going to say, American wine, c'est pas mal, not too bad. And turn their noses up on it. So he says, okay, cool. Let's do this blind. And let's invite journalists. This is very gutsy, by the way, considering that nobody has heard of Napa so far. They serve the wines blind. The judges are told to award them points on a 20-point scale. The points are added up and divided by number of judges. And mon Dieu, sacre bleu. I just said that like it was a country bumpkin, sacre bleu. The 1973 Chateau Montelena is the top Chardonnay. The 1973 Stag's Leap is the top Cabernet. They best all the French wines in the top 5. There's also a bunch of other American wines. There's Ridge, which today, Ridge Montebello, it's a Cabernet for the ages. There is Chalon, that's up in Monterey. They make exceptional Chardonnay. The Americans are killing it. The French are none too pleased by this. Now, this little upset might have gone nowhere, except that one of the journalists, George M. Tabor of Time magazine, who wrote an article about this tasting that sealed Napa's fate. Years later, Warren Winiarski, did I pronounce that wrong? Probably, of Stag's Leap, sold the property for a whopping $185 million. Meanwhile, Mike Gergich of Montelena went on to form Gergich Wines, which if you've ever had, they're stunning wines. Stagleep, also a delicious wine. Now, meanwhile, France is horrified. France is enraged. France banned Spurrier from some of their most famous tastings for at least 1 year. They're like, bad boy, you will behave. And then, furthermore, France said, the problem is that our wines are meant to age 10 years. How would you say 10 years in French? 10 ans? 10 ans! We will kick your ass. 10 years later, both France and US hold a blind tasting. Guess who wins again? The US. 30 years later, guess who wins again? The US. Sidebar, there's a very fun movie called Bottle Shock starring Alan Rickman as Spurrier, and he plays him completely different, much like colder and sterner than Spurrier was in real life, but also it's Alan Rickman. So just like, it's a fun movie. It's wildly ineffectual, but give it a watch. Now, that brings us to 2025, nearly 50 years later, there is a winemaker, Patrick Capella of Monterio Wines, who is setting up a reimagining of the Judgment of Paris. Currently has 2 judges panels selecting wines from both the France and the US that will then be blind tasted by another panel. It's like a whole double blind thing, all to get attention for the US wines. So what do we think is going to happen? Also, should I do my own blind tasting? Hey, Michael, would you set up a tasting of France versus America for me blind?
Sure.
Okay. I will cover the rematch when it happens, so sub and bell for those details. In the meantime, enjoy this little slice of history. Pour yourself a glass of wine. You're worth it.
You did like, I think France is this and all these famous makers and years, and then like